Welcome to A Time for Change presented by Citi. I'm Marquise Francis, joined by Alexis Christophorus and Anjali Kimlani. As Americans are looking forward to spending lots of money this holiday season and actually paying prices highest they've been in decades, let's talk toys. First, for the good news. While consumer prices rose 6.8% last month compared to the same time last year, the cost of toys is up relatively a modest 1.2%.
And now for the bad news. Because of supply chain problems, you may not be able to find the specific toy you're looking for. Let's bring in Lisa Williams, who has a doctorate in supply chains and is the founder of a company that makes diverse collection of dolls. Lisa, thanks so much for joining the program. Really great to have you here. And I want to talk about, first of all, your career path. You left academia to start this company, World of Entertainment, Publishing and Inspiration, and created dolls with different skin tones, body shapes, and they're now sold in Walmart, Target, on Amazon, and other places. Looking at everything that's going on right now, especially with the supply chain issues, how is that holding up this year for you in terms of, the supplies and the shipping? And is there a difference in retail versus online that you're seeing?
Yes, we are seeing a difference. First of all, thank you for having me. And yes, the supply chain is most definitely having its fun with us. We are experiencing some challenges with our supply chain, but we planned for it. I mean, it didn't come as a surprise. And so we, in partnership with our retailers, actually working to deliver earlier to make sure that there would be product on the shelf.
And Lisa, jumping in here, I think when a lot of people think about supply chain issues, they're kind of envisioning toys being held up on ships at a dock and no one is taking them off. Is it that simple, or is it a bit more complicated what you're working with right now?
It is a little bit more complicated. There are several things that are factoring into the supply chain crisis that we're seeing. So, of course, COVID has a huge impact. And that's because we were all locked in our homes for safety reasons because of COVID. And what happened, in addition to us gaining weight, speaking for myself, is that we were gaining in our increase of desire for products. And so we now have a pent up demand. And so now you have a pent up demand with limited supply, and you have the supply chain crisis, which means it's taking longer to get the product to the retailer. All of that is creating this increased demand, which is also affecting inflation. So no, there are a lot of things that go into it, from the manufacturing to shipping, freight forwarding, warehousing, and then ultimate delivery to the retailer.
Lisa, you're not the only one with the COVID-15, as I like to call it. Don't worry, you're not alone there. But I want to dig into that a little bit, because obviously from the start of the pandemic, we've seen the supply chain really pressured, going back to early in the pandemic when factories in China were shut down, for example. That was, one part of it. And now in the past years, we've seen different reasons why there have been limitations on the supply chain. Most recently, labor shortages have been one of them. So it's really affecting so many different industries. I wonder, across the board, whether it's transportation or otherwise, do you see this lasting a really long time?
I do. And I think it's going to be based upon what industry. And to your point, which is a brilliant one, is that we're seeing lots of shortage. We're seeing some shortage of raw materials, and that's what we're seeing in like the beverage industry. We're seeing a shortage of employees, like in warehousing and in other aspects of transportation. So all of those shortage, from raw materials to human shortage, is creating to exacerbate this. We're not going to see a change, I don't think, until we start to see that change. So I am predicting, generally, if we're very optimistic, we may see this come to an end in about 8 months. More likely, it'll be more like a year to 18 months. However, if we're talking about the beverage industry, I, like other experts, assume it's going to be more like 2025 to 2026 when we actually start to see a break in the shortages in the beverage industry.
Wow. I think a lot of people just held their breath. They're like, wow, so I go to the bar and I have to wait a few years to get my beer. But Lisa, I want to ask you about the toys specifically. You started selling Positively Perfect in 2009, well before we obviously had this racial reckoning in this country, and before Black Lives Matter was even a thing. So I'm curious, what kind of changes have you seen in the marketplace personally as a Black female founder, or just more generically in the marketplace for such toys as you're selling?
That's a brilliant question. And you're right. We did start well before the crisis that we're seeing now in social unrest. And really, I was a very happy and successful professor. I was at several leading academic positions. And as a matter of fact, I was the highest ranking person in my field. But I actually saw a little girl having some saying that she did not like her skin tone and saying that she thought that her skin was actually nasty. And that really broke my heart. And so from that day, I started creating dolls that would represent the beauty and brilliance in all children of all ethnicities. So we make sure that not only do we custom blend the skin tones, but that we also make sure that the face sculpts are authentic as well. We actually call them one-of-a-kind pieces of art. And so we've seen the demand for our dolls continue to increase because one of the things that the social unrest did do is it brought us to greater awareness of the need that we need to have in diversity so that children see not only themselves, but their classmates when they're playing.
Definitely. I think last year's protests have really put a spotlight on this, Lisa. You're touching a really important point. I do have to pivot, though, to looking more at the economy. You know, we recently saw the producer price index numbers out today and seeing overall wholesale inflation has jumped 9.6% in the past year. And this follows news from last week that consumer prices have increased by 6.8%, marking a 39-year high. How do you see this impacting business?
It's going to continue to be a challenge for us in business because, you know, we're outpacing what the Fed had predicted. Your numbers are absolutely correct. We were expecting something closer to 2%, and we're seeing, 3 times that. So it is something because it means that our raw materials are going to be more expensive, which along the way means we're going to simply have to pass at least some of that cost on to the retailer, and then they will pass some of that on to the consumer. So all of us need to buckle in, as we say, and be prepared for these higher prices until we see strategies and plans in place to actually mitigate some of this inflation.
And Lisa, I want to go back a little bit because you said something really poignant. You said you were at the top of your industry, you were doing such amazing things in academia, and then you just pivoted and said, I'm going to jump headfirst into entrepreneurship. And for a lot of people, that's just astounding. And obviously, you've been so successful. But I'm curious, what was one of those tough lessons you had to learn early on to understand this is a different ballgame you were putting yourself into?
The hardest thing that I had to learn is that to trust myself. I did have, much education. I do have a PhD in supply chain management and business and marketing. So I understood. But I was coming into an area that I had no explicit education in. I did not know anything about the toy industry or fashion industry, all of which is required to produce the dolls that we do. But what I had to learn is that the passion and desire that I had to create to make society a better place so that all children could see themselves, that itself was a qualification that enabled me or allowed me to play in this field. So having that equipment of self-confidence with the education has helped me to achieve the success that I have. But it really was hard when you're moving into something you've never done before and there's no one there that was mentoring you. It's very challenging. So obviously it leaned on me to actually begin to truly trust myself.
Well, it also puts you ahead of the curve, as we've seen in the past year, the Great Resignation, as it's known. A lot of people quitting their jobs, jumping into something new, or at least hoping to find the time to do so. What would your advice be to those that are searching for jobs right now or looking to jump into something new?
Well, you're right about the Great Resignation. And again, that came as another one of the benefits from being home during COVID. As we all sat there and worked from our homes, we began to assess our lives and what we were doing for our careers and to see if this really what I want to do. And a large number of us said, no, I want to do something else. I want to do something that actually, makes my heart sing. So for those of us or those that are thinking about making changes or that have already done so during the Great Resignation, I say, look at your skills. Really look at what you enjoy doing. Have a clear list of what you want to make yourself happy and to be a contribution to the next organization. And perhaps the next organization is the one that you create. But having a clear list of your strengths, the opportunities that exist in the marketplace, and what you can do to make a difference. All of that combined with your skills, obviously, will actually help to make that transition a smoother one.
I'm sure that recipe also calls for a little bit of luck and a little bit of courage as well.
Oh, yes.
We'll have to leave it there. Lisa Williams, World of EPI founder, thanks so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Coming up, a founder on a mission to revolutionize the mental health care system. That's after the break.
Welcome back to A Time for Change, presented by Citi. Study after study, survey after survey shows that we are in the midst of a mental health crisis in this country. And our next guest is the founder of a new company aimed at revolutionizing mental health care and scaling it so that it's available to any adult who wants and needs it. The company is called Real, and it was started by Ariella Safira after a friend attempted suicide.
I became passionate about mental health care, as you mentioned, when a friend had attempted to take her life while I was an undergrad. And that really was my first experience with the mental health care system, the first time I'd ever seen a rehab or really come close to psych meds and therapy. And I didn't think it made sense. So I threw myself at it. I got in touch with David Kelly, who's the founder of IDEO, and we hit it off, ended up spending about 2 years working together on how can we redesign mental health care. And then I actually left Stanford undergrad. I thought I would drop out entirely to build Real. I left for a year working on mental health care, and David convinced me that if I want to change healthcare without a medical degree, it's going to be tough. If I want to do it without a bachelor's, good luck. So I came back and I finished up, and then I continued to work on it at a few places, and eventually got to Columbia's clinical psych program, training to be a therapist. And while I was there, saw there are so many flaws in the system, starting from how we train clinicians, right? The actual research that is used to drive mental health care as we know it today is quite biased, right? It's biased on a white population. It's in many ways sexist. And moreover, it's incredibly hard. It's one-on-one therapy today is just not scalable, right? We only have 550,000 mental health professionals in this country. We can't possibly build a system that reaches every American, let alone affordably, if, therapy is a one-on-one experience with so few clinicians. And so I dropped out successfully this time to found Real.
I want to just talk about the platform and how it works and how it's different from what's out there, because this space has become pretty crowded. You've got companies like Headspace, Calm, Noom, trying to reach the masses regarding mental health on digital platforms. What's the differentiator for Real?
First and foremost, we're not putting one-on-one therapy online. We're not just putting the experience that exists today online. Rather, we're creating a new care model itself. And it's powered by this on-demand one-to-many experience that looks and feels, not to be reductive, but looks and feels much more like your Peloton classes of today. And so a member can join Real costing between $13 and $24 a month. And we have a monthly membership model, really building an everyday relationship with mental health care and not just a crisis intervention. And, a member joins, they do a monthly mental check-in. So we capture their mental health on a monthly basis. And from there, they have access to a full suite of various mental health care offerings, all built in-house.
How do you see the long-term relationship between Real and the client? Because when it comes to the business model, I'd imagine most businesses want repeat clientele. Now, is the idea to have sort of a serial client paying a monthly subscription, or is the goal to have them feel independent enough that they can go off on their own and not have Real?
The insight we're bringing to life is people do need to work on their mental health regularly such that they prevent care. In the same way that you can't just go to the gym for a month and assume you're healthy for life, you can't work on your mental health for a month and assume you're healthy for life. Right. And ideally, if you work on it in a way that is comparable to the gym, you reach fewer crises. So you need less of those or fewer of those high cost interventions. And instead, you maintain your wellness day after day. And so really what Real is doing is building the everyday lifelong relationship with mental health care, ideally in the future, funded by payers, such that fewer people are reaching rock bottom and such that we actually build an everyday practice with mental health, bringing more depth and wellness to people, not just waiting until they collapse to help.
How are you creating a community through Real and not making it feel like it's automated, that somebody's going to get an automated check-in, like, how are you doing today? You know, how are you going to make it feel personalized?
So we have a lot of updates coming in 2022, but really we're building ways for members to socialize with one another without necessarily showing their identities, right? One of the biggest issues in mental health care, and I should say, is we know things like group therapy work, and in many ways, they work better than one-on-one therapy. The very problem is that most people don't feel comfortable joining a group therapy experience that talks about infidelity, right? Or exploring your sexuality. And so the insights we're really bringing to life are things like, how can we bring Reddit-style community to the healthcare system, right? And give people, we've built anonymized socialization, right? People find peers and communities and networks more on Reddit and Twitter than they often do in person, right? And so what we're doing is capturing what are the principles behind that? What is it that allows people to, without sharing their identity on these platforms, feel safe enough and trusting enough to speak about very intimate concepts on Reddit, on Twitter, et cetera? And then how can we bring that to life in a way that is clinically effective and a way that actually meets people where they're at, again, in a system that's kind of failed to meet patients where they're at?
Speaking of meeting them where they're at, I know that your business model is subscription-based. You said earlier between $13 and $24 a month. You know, for some people at the bottom of the economic ladder, that is out of reach. You know, how are you ensuring that you're able to access as many people as possible?
So a few ways. One is actually looking into, like, how is this funded beyond private pay? To date, we are HSA and FSA covered. The goal of Real is to become covered by payers in the future. On one hand, we have the infrastructure to ensure this is funded beyond private pay. And on the other, we're not just waiting until then to offer care. We already today are meeting communities where they're at. And we're not just offering the care we have, we're figuring out what care looks like for them and how we can adapt to constantly build on a model that reaches more demographics, not just based on price point, but based on experience, reaches more demographics than care does today.
So Ariella, when you started Real, you were in your early 20s. You're not that far removed from there right now. You managed to raise more than $16 million from VC shops like Lightspeed and Forerunner, but also other investors include actress Gwyneth Paltrow and soccer star Megan Rapinoe. Talk to us about the experience of raising money and how did you get people on board?
I am very fortunate to have phenomenal investors on our cap table. I think one of the most helpful things for me was pretty early on meeting Anu Dugal, who is the founding partner of Female Founders Fund. And at the time, I was 24 years old. I sent her a cold LinkedIn message. I did not have a pitch deck. I certainly did not have a business model, though I had a very clear point of view on the flaws of the mental health care system and how needed it already was and will continue to be to build a new healthcare system. And she immediately understood. I mean, first and foremost, kudos to her for responding to a cold LinkedIn message. But since then, we met in person regularly. She very much helped me in defining what was needed to get investors on board, build this into a company. And she was my lead investor in the first round of funding. And I have the privilege to be building something that so many people are impacted by. I have to say that mental health is not a niche. And I think nearly all the investors I've worked with had a personal story, be it about them or a loved one, relevant to how the mental health care system failed them, right? And how they didn't know what it looked like to work on their mental health and were eager to co-build something that would help.
And lastly, I just want to ask sort of who this service is for. Is it for women only? Is it for people who are fairly healthy and just want to sort of maintain their mental health, or for people who are in crisis?
Real is for everyone. It's for all adults. You know, about half our population right now is severely depressed. We serve and show clinical efficacy in a various set of populations, but what's more important to name is we're really building the everyday wellness tool. And the reason for that is mental health care to date has really been a crisis management system, right? We have only built models that people reach when they're at rock bottom. And the very goal of Real is, how do we meet people before crisis? How do we both track their mental health such that we can identify decline before a person hits rock bottom? And how do we ensure we build preventative care such that fewer people reach rock bottom in the first place? Right? What is the actual common thread that guides someone from where they are today to where they might be when they hit rock bottom, to how do they actually prevent rock bottom? That's really the system Real is building.
Now, Real was actually launched in 2019, and while the company did not specify a number, they did tell Yahoo Finance that they provide care to thousands of monthly paid subscribers. Still ahead, the Treasury Department makes a big announcement to help small and minority-owned businesses. We're back right after this. Welcome back to A Time for Change, where we keep an eye on what's changing and how we do business and who has a seat at the table. And some news on that front from the U.S. Treasury Department. The Treasury announced today the release of $8.7 billion aimed at fostering what it calls a more equitable economy. Now, the money will increase lending to small and minority-owned businesses and to people living in poorer communities with limited access to banking. These funds will be deployed through the Emergency Capital Investment Program. That's a COVID support program. And that's all for this week's A Time for Change. For myself, Marquise Francis, and Anjali Kamlani, thanks so much for watching.